The tech bros are trying to take away your humanity, but you're not a machine. Let's talk about what it means to live like a human in this high-tech world. This is Analogish, and I'm your host, Becky Mollenkamp. I am really, really pleased to introduce my guest today, Chrissy King, who I've now known for a while, and I'm very thrilled that you're agreeing to do this podcast with me after I saw something you posted on Substack that really got me excited to have a conversation with you for this show specifically. Before we talk about that, though, I want to quickly introduce you to people who may not yet know you. You are a writer, a speaker, an educator, a former strength coach who has a passion for creating a diverse and inclusive wellness industry, something that definitely needs to happen. You're the author of the Body Liberation Project, which is also the name of your Substack, I believe. Is that right?
The Liberation Collective.
Sorry, there we go.
Yeah.
Liberation Collective on
Yeah.
Substack. And so I'm really excited to have you here to chat. First of all, hello, and thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here today.
Yay. And I thought we could start by having you just read. It's a short little post that you did on Substack, and it's been a while now, but I thought I'd have you read it, and then we could let that be our jumping off point.
Of course. Okay. So I spend so much time resting, and every once in a while, I start to wonder if I'm resting too much. Inevitably, I'm always reminded that my ancestors were enslaved people. They survived atrocious circumstances, daily terror, so that I can be here today. So that I can rest whenever I feel like it. Why should I ever feel guilty for that? I'm resting for myself and for my ancestors.
So first, just let that one sink in. It was a scroll stopping moment for me of noticing it, letting that wash over me, and just sort of the like visceral reaction to something like that. And also thinking, yeah, like let's have that conversation about rest and also all of these bigger things that come up when we talk about rest, most especially rest for Black women. But first I wanted to start with when you wrote that post, if you can remember now, it's been a bit, but
Yeah.
when you're talking about resting, what does that mean for you? Because rest doesn't look the same for everyone, doesn't always mean sleeping. What did it mean for you?
I love talking about this because rest can mean so many different things. And I do think that even the concept of resting feels sometimes impossible in late stage capitalism, right? And so it's like, oh, I would love to rest if I could. And so I think that is going to be different for everyone. And that a lot of that's going to be determined by your circumstances. I am a person who I am child free by choice. That was an intentional choice. So I have created and curated a life that allows me to have more rest than perhaps some other people would have access to. But the child free part was by design. And so for me, that literally means like taking it slow. It means like Saturday, Sunday mornings, like laying in bed and reading books as much as I feel like it. It means like not feeling like I always have to be quote unquote productive, right? We live in a society, and I feel like we're especially in this time where like girl boss era is like trying to have its like return, right? And I'm like, yeah, no, thank you. I won't be participating in that.
Been there, done that, not here for the sequel.
Not going back for that. And so for me, it's just like, yeah, not feeling like I have to be productive every moment of every day. Or if I'm just sitting on the couch daydreaming, instead of thinking like all of things I could be doing right now, it's like, oh, actually daydreaming is a beautiful use of my time as well. And so I think it's just allowing yourself really to not feel like every moment of your day is supposed to be for productivity. And I think in a society, like I said, going back to late, so capitalism, which we have been made to feel like productivity should be at the top of our to-do, like every moment of our time, we should be focused on productivity and output. Like for me, rest is actively fighting against that thought process that my life's purpose is to be productive. I actually don't think that's the truth or the case for me anyways.
Ooh, I love that because then it makes me, of course, want to ask, what is your life's purpose?
Oh my gosh, such a big question. I wish I had the answer. I don't know, but I do know that like joy is such a big part of my life. And I talked like in that quote about the access to joy, to liberation, to rest that my ancestors did not have. And so anytime I do feel like that pull where like, oh, I should be doing more, or I should be using this time in a different way, or even this idea of like where I should be in life, that's a big one, right? And this idea of like all these things, I'm like, actually, what if living in my joy and exploring life with the freedom to say, what do I want to do today? What I want today to look like? What if that is actually just something I can sit with? I don't think I have an answer to what is the purpose of life, or my life, I should say. But I do know that I always want to be sitting in joy. And I think that joy can look different for every person, and joy can also look different every day. But how can I make that a part of my life? Because I think it's so easy, again, to get into this idea of like, I'm always supposed to be striving for something. I'm always supposed to be trying to achieve the next thing. Okay, I did this thing. Now what's next? And it's like you could spend your whole life on that rat wheel, and I don't want to do that. I just
Yeah.
don't. Yeah, of
And sometimes I think joy can look like what we traditionally define as productive and productivity,
course.
right? Like I'm sure there's a great deal
Yeah.
of things with your work that do bring you joy.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
alongside that, too often we discount so many other things that do bring us joy because they aren't considered productive. And of course, I would say
Hmm.
if it's bringing you joy, it's productive because
Yeah.
it's producing a wonderful outcome. But what are the things you mentioned reading? But I'm just curious, what are
Hmm.
other things you're doing when you're saying you're resting, when you're not sleeping? Napping's also
Yeah.
valid and
Yeah.
wonderful, but when it doesn't look like sleeping, it looks like rest. What does it look like to you? Because I think some of that for you right now also is the focus around trying to put the phone down more.
Yeah. Oh my gosh,
Right?
absolutely.
Like, doing things that are more
Hmm.
analog, which is what the show's about. So what does it look like
Absolutely.
for you?
Yeah, I think putting down the phone has been such a big part of that. And I do think that putting down the phone has also helped so much with joy because I think it's so easy to get sucked into like what everybody else is doing in life. And then you start thinking, well, my life doesn't look like that because I'm not working hard enough or because I haven't, again, I'm not being as productive as I should have been. Or I'm not making as much money as this person is making. And I just always like to remind myself and everyone that everything on social media is an illusion to a certain degree. And so I don't ever like want to use social media as a way to measure what I'm doing against what like what everyone else is doing. So I think putting my phone down has been number one, a tremendous labor, more than I would like to admit. Like it's really, really hard to like put down that phone more often. I've gotten much better at it, but I still have to work on that every day. But putting down the phone also allows me so much more space for creativity. So it's like, okay, I can I like read a lot. I also like just take walks outside. Oftentimes I take walks with like no headphones, just listening to like the sounds of New York City, which are a lot. And crocheting, I love to crochet. I learned how to crochet like last spring, I think, and I crochet a lot now. I make really cool things or just, whatever I feel like making. And then also, I think I think that one thing that we have lost the art of is being bored and how much boredom is like the thing with the phone is like the moment you like, I don't have anything to do, I can just like pull up the phone and get that dopamine hit, right? But like allowing yourself to just sit with nothing is actually such a powerful thing. I think it's increased my creativity, but it's also allowed me blank space to just think. And I think sometimes we use our phones as a distraction because the blank space is sometimes hard and sitting in the unknown or sitting in the boredom and just like being with your thoughts can often be difficult for people, but I do think it's so important that we learn to just be okay with being bored. And I can't get into like the science of it because I'm not a scientist, but there is a lot of research around the importance of boredom for our brains. So I think even just sitting and doing nothing and just being okay with that or walking to the park and just sitting there and just doing nothing without my phone. And I keep going back to like, I got, again, the title of this podcast is analogish, but I really truly believe that the less I'm on social media, the better I feel in every aspect of my life. And you also recognize that you're really not missing that much. It's not like you're missing something that's so meaningful that you won't hear about it somewhere else or something like that. And also, it's really the thing I haven't mentioned is just spending so much time with my friends in real life. I don't want to get updates about what my friends are doing through social media. I want to talk to them. I want to pick up the phone. I want to be with them in community. I want to go on walks with them. I want to hang out at the park with them. So like just being with my friends in real life has been another thing that I have cultivated more intentionally because I'm like, yeah, I could be behind the screen looking at strangers, or I could just actually go be with people in community. And I know that like friendship as an adulthood can be hard sometimes if you don't feel very connected to people. But putting down the phone also gives you the opportunity to find cool things happening in your community, in your neighborhood, get out of your comfort zone, join a new activity, meet new people, which can feel really uncomfortable. But I think that we have, in a lot of ways, tricked ourselves into thinking that we have this sense of connection through social media. But I think it's a false sense of connection in a lot of ways. And so, like, yeah, just getting out of the phone and getting into real life has been such a beautiful thing for me.
Yeah. You and I don't wanna pretend that it's easy, and I don't think you would either. You
No, it's
mentioned it's
not.
really hard to
It's
put your
very
phone down.
hard.
So
Yeah.
as you've been endeavoring to allow yourself more rest, allow yourself more joy, allow yourself to be off the screen and in, like, the real world, what is the guilt that comes up? What are the messages that come up, and how do you deal with those?
I think the guilt for me comes not around social media, but just around like I do think I take a lot of time doing nothing sometimes. And I mean, I don't think that like reading is doing nothing, but just like luxuriating, just having a restful day and saying, I'm not forcing myself to do anything I don't feel like doing today. I'm just going to see where the day takes me. And I think that so much of the messaging we get is that you're not going to be where you want to be in life if you don't use every moment. If you're not waking up at 5 a.m. and making the most of your day. I don't wake up at 5 a.m. Like, and I'm not going to start anytime soon. And like, even I will say one of the things around guilt that I've had to like really work to let go of is this idea of getting up early. I'm not a morning person. And so I used to work a corporate job. I had to get up early for that. So like obviously I had to be out the bed. But since I have not worked in a corporate setting, I don't really have to get up at a certain time and I don't like getting up early. So I used to be like, well, everyone's getting up at 7. I should be getting up 7 because that feels like the right thing. Like a productive people, high performing members of society get up at 7. And so I would feel guilt about getting up at 8:30 or 9. And then one day I was just like, wow, who cares? Like, I am not gonna feel guilty about getting up. This is when I like to get up. Maybe one day I'll like getting up at 7 again, and maybe I never will. And that is also okay. Like, there's no rule book that says I have to get up by 7 in order to be a productive member of society or order to get my day done. So I'm just like, I think I've really tried to disconnect from like all of the shoulds and just
Yeah.
say, okay, I'm going to do what actually feels good to me and my body. And I don't really care what time anybody gets up. It doesn't matter to me.
You just mentioned body. And I think
Yeah.
that's really important because your work is with the body largely. You talk
Hmm.
about body liberation. And I don't think we always think about time freedom as a part of like an
Yeah.
expression of how we treat our body. But like you just said, when you're thinking about rest, when you're thinking about sleep, when you're thinking about joy and all these things, it's also about how does it make me feel in my body. So I just wonder, like, what do you think about that link between rest and luxuriating and
Yeah.
the link that that has with your body?
I think it's so much a connection around that because again, when it comes to like this any type of restriction, right? Around body restriction or time restriction or any of these things, it's all linked in this idea of like perfectionism, which always goes back to white supremacy. And I think of so many books that are written largely by white men that are talking about like how to be the most productive person. And it includes these things like getting up at 5 a.m., meditating for 15 minutes, taking a cold shower, like all of these things, right? And I'm like, well, that wasn't written for me. So I don't need to pay attention to that. And I think that all of those things around restriction or like how your body should be or what size it should be or how you should exercise, it's all these ideas to like keep us in these boxes. And I'm like, I think when we talk about like liberation and freedom, it's really about leaning into what feels good for you in your own body. Right. And so the same with like how you eat or how you choose to move your body or what time you choose to get up. All these things are linked to how do I feel good in my body. And I think when it comes to like even diet culture, so much of myself, I can speak for myself, like when I was really deep in diet culture, like I really like was disconnected from my body in the sense of like what foods do I actually enjoy? Like how do I like to actually move? It was always based on what I think people are telling me to do to achieve this ideal like way of looking. And I think it's really easy to fall into that same thinking about like, oh yes, I need to get up at this time. I need to go to bed at this time. I need to, all of these rules that somebody else decided are the right way to be productive that also, like, even when I think about diet culture or when I think about like productivity culture, so much of it is rooted in a certain demographic. And then we're all trying to conform to that demographic, right? And I think about all these books that are written by like white men about like how they're able to get so much done. And I'm like, yeah, because who's doing the other things in your life? Who's cooking for you? Who's taking care of your kids if you have a family? Who's grocery shopping? Like who's doing all the mental load of carrying the household so that you get to do these things? So like that was not written for me, that's not my life.
Yeah, exactly. I just think that that link to our bodies and liberation, it's like you said, it's all the areas and all the ways we're restricting ourselves around the time we get the joy we're allowed, the rest we're allowed, all of that. And this piece around it's not written for me makes me think of the bigger part, I think, of what your message was in that post around ancestral history and the ties and the connections you're making there around rest. And I could see that going one of two ways. And the way you have it that you're saying is like for my ancestors, rest was never an option. And a way that I can almost honor that is by allowing myself to luxuriate, right? In a
Mhm.
way that they could have never imagined. But I think there is also the flip side of that that I think often happens in certain cultures. And tell me if I'm wrong, but I think this messaging can sink in, which is almost like our ancestors didn't work that hard, weren't put through all of that for us to sit around and do nothing, right? Like, so now we gotta excel and
Yeah.
achieve the most and make the most of our lives. So I could see that message kind of going either way. And I'm just wondering if that is an experience you've had and if that is something you had to wrestle with to get to where you're at now.
I think it's such an interesting thought process, right? Because there is this idea that like that I have access to opportunities they did not have access to, and I need to make the absolute most of every single one of those. And I think that for people for with whom that resonates, like who am I to say that's not an okay thought process, right? If that resonates for you. And I think in a lot of ways I can see that. I can understand that, right? When I think about a lot of Black Americans doing things, in politics or government or being the president, things that like none of our ancestors got to do. Like, of course, like how could I say that that is not a good use of your time because you're doing something our ancestors never got to do? And on the flip side, I think both things can be true.
Like,
Actually,
isn't that usually how it is?
I think both things can be true because that's absolutely nothing that I could ever say that's not true. Of course, that's true. But for me and what I desire for myself, I think about, it was a couple years ago. I was on a summer vacation. It was like in the south of France. I was there for 2.5 weeks. And I literally was sitting on a boat one day in the ocean. And I was thinking, like, wow, this is so wild. Like, my ancestors never would have been able to just take 2.5 weeks to vacation in the
Yeah.
south of France. You know what I'm saying? Like, they
Mhm.
couldn't do that. So when I think about the fact that, like, and I don't want to get too deep in this conversation, but like slavery was so atrocious in a way that we don't understand. Like, nobody really, unless you study, like, really, really study slavery, you don't understand it. Like, the little brief blip that most of us got in high school, middle school, whatever, literally is a drop in the bucket of how horrendous and horrific slavery was. Like, slavery was a genocide to the worst degree. And so when I think about the fact that like my ancestors went through much and I'm still here today, like I'm a living product of their resiliency. And I think that honoring them with rest, joy, pleasure in a way that they never got to experience is an honor to them. And I think the same can be true for working hard and taking opportunities and taking positions and doing things that they also never would get to do. I think all of those things are honoring our ancestors to the highest degree.
Yeah, and let me be clear, you wrote a whole ass book. You have a successful business, so it's not in any way to say you haven't been honoring them. Also, through
Absolutely.
achievement, right? And like that both and.
Yeah.
I just think it's an interesting, like a dichotomy that I think that many white folks just can't understand. We don't
Yeah.
without that history, that tension that I would imagine that it could
Yes.
create, right? Around
Mhm.
that relationship with rest of
Yeah.
both it's almost this like, yes, this is the way I honor, but then also some where I could see you bring up some of that guilt of, but also
Yeah.
the should feelings and all of that. That I just don't think that a white body person can understand.
Yeah, and I think what you just say something very important because yeah, I have done a lot of work as well, right? It's not like I've just been, chilling my whole life. I have done a lot of work, and I think for me, it's just a balance of not feeling like once I do this thing, now I have to do the next thing at a higher level. I think that I'm not creating a life for myself, which feels like it always has to be another metric in order to feel good about what I've accomplished because I have worked hard. I did write a book. And there have been periods of my life where I've worked incredibly hard. So it's also like things also go in waves, right? Like you take periods of, ideally, you can have these periods where you work really passionately on projects and then you have a time where you say like I'm going to rest now and also like regenerate more ideas and do healing work and all these things and then again there'll be another phase where I'm probably working more intensely and more passionately on certain projects. So it is a both and there is a tension, and I think there's also the tension that a lot of Black folks feel too about rest and ease when so many of us who look just like me don't have the opportunity still to rest and have ease, right? So that's like a
Mm,
whole nother conversation that we could have. That's another guilt that I have dealt with or I've experienced. So yeah, it's like a complex holding of all these different emotions.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I wanna get into another piece related to that in a second, but before I do, I just wanna talk about the humanity element of for
Mm,
yourself, because what I want the show to be about is, like, how do we reconnect with our humanity in a
yeah.
world now, especially this AI-powered world, where we just
Yeah.
I think we more acutely than ever are feeling it being stripped away with a giant asterisk that for many people that
Mhm.
has always been like the stripping of humanity has always been
Yeah.
there, and I love that you're shining the light on that part of that story too. But I think for in our lifetimes anyway, I think it feels like I think just many of us are feeling it more acutely, like where we start to question what does it even mean to be human anywhere more in a world where we're going to have robots serving us food at McDonald's and AI is writing everything, right? So, how
Yeah.
does rest and luxuriating? I love that word because I think it probably causes tension for a lot of people because for many people they feel like that is something they don't have access to, and I don't just mean
Yeah.
actual access but like internal access to that they have all this guilt around luxuriating. So what is like
Yeah.
rest and luxuriating, what is that, how is that changing your relationship or helping your relationship with your own sense of your humanity?
Hmm. That's such a good question. Yeah. When I think about my humanity, I think my relationship with rest and joy and luxuriating often, like, the word that comes up for me is softness, right? The ability to live with softness in a society that has not always treated, and still in so many ways does not treat Black people with softness, right? Like, yeah, I have so many things I want to say. Trying to be soft or to feel not even trying to be soft, allowing yourself the safety to feel soft in the ways that you can in a society who does not always make you feel safe is an act of revolution at all times, actually. And so that is why, for me, like creating softness in my own home, creating softness in my relationships, treating myself with compassion and softness is so important to me because when I step out into the world, I'm not always guaranteed that softness. Historically, we haven't been guaranteed that softness. So it is so important for me to treat myself with softness and ease and respect and all of these things because I'm not necessarily guaranteed that in the world. But when I think about my humanity, I know I am deserving and worthy of all those things. So even if the world will not show me that, I am going to show that to myself.
Beautiful. That feels so
Thank you.
great. And it just feels so perfect going into what I want to talk about next, which is about white women and
Yeah.
rest and what we see
Yeah.
happening. I think Trisha Hersey and Rest is
Yes.
Resistance,
Hmm.
like all the love.
Yeah.
And because it's a book that's widely available, many people have read.
Yeah.
I think a lot of white women have read it and
Mhm.
internalized that message as if it were a universal message, right?
Yeah.
So as if this message was for all people to take on equally. And I
Mhm.
think that we can see some of this, and it's it's not like this is the first time it's happened where white women kind
Yeah.
of glom onto something and then co-opt it and try to make it their own. And I'm
Yes.
just
Yes.
curious because your message on Substack just really resonated to me because I think it speaks to why that is problematic
Mhm.
and why rest is not universal
Yeah.
and why I just think it's so important for white women to understand that. So I'm just curious what when you think about white
Yeah.
women and rest and the ways that
Mhm.
we often see them talking about their rest as liberation, their rest as resistance,
Mhm.
what comes up for you as a Black woman who's talking about this?
Yeah, I'm glad we brought I was gonna say at some point we can't talk about rest as resistance without talking about Trisha Hersey, and her work is so, monumental and so special. And I just yes, I've seen my thoughts on this are so much. I mean, I think number 1, I do think that everyone deserves rest in the ways that we deserve rest. Of course, that is universal. And also, I think that when a white woman says rest is resistance, I don't really think that has the same meaning as a Black woman saying rest is resistance. And I think about this so much because 2020 and 2021, I was doing so much work in anti-racism in the wellness space and just like doing really, really difficult work that was important, but also very draining. And I think, for us to be 6 years past that and to see like people revert so easily back to old habits and to give up anti-racism work as if it was just like a cozy self-help moment has been infuriating in a lot of ways. And so to see white women say rest is resistance around, especially in this political climate right now, is infuriating because so much of what we are experiencing in this country is rooted in white supremacy. And although Black women in particular, Black people, but Black women in particular have done our entire lives have been doing work around anti-racism. When it comes to dismantling white supremacy, so much of that work actually sits with white people to do. The work of dismantling, right? Like, of course, Black women lead the way, but when we're talking about doing the work and really disentangling yourself from white supremacy, white people have to do that work, right? White people have propped up the system, and so white people have to undo the system. And so I don't think it's the time for white women to say rest is resistance because no, resistance is actually you physically doing resistance, not just sitting in the rest of it. and the rest part of it, like, no, you need to actively be saying, how am I dismantling white supremacy in my life? Am I having the difficult conversations with my family? Am I actively going to do the work on the front lines because it's actually safer for me to be on the front lines than for Black and brown people to be on the safe lines, right? So I don't really think that this is the time to take Trisha Hershey's message as a white woman and say I'm resting. I don't know. I'm sorry. I just don't think that is the
Don't have to
time
apologize.
or the message. Like, yes, you deserve rest. Everyone deserves rest, but rest is not resistance for white folks. White folks have to actually be on the front lines doing resistance work.
The labor is the resistance for us, and the rest is in
Absolutely.
support of us being able to do the labor, and that is it
Absolutely.
is right, and it's not the same situation. So thank you for speaking to that, because I just think it's so important when we talk about rest, and I just felt like that was why your post to me really stood out, and that I think it made it very clear without explicitly saying calling out white women, but it was very clear of like, this is why my rest is different and why my rest matters in a
Yeah.
different way. And I just think that's really
Yeah.
valuable. And I'm curious too, as long as we're talking about white women co-opting things, I'm just curious, like, because not only have you been through the 2020 stuff and all of these things, but your work around body liberation, about diet culture. I mean, again, that's an area where we've seen over
Yes.
time white women come in and start talking about body positivity and sort of taking over this movement that wasn't about them to begin with, and in fact was almost, about rejecting,
Mhm.
whiteness, or rejecting the centering of whiteness. So I'm just kind of curious if you see those parallels and how that feels for you.
Yes, I do see the parallels. I do see the parallels in so many ways because yes, I call the work I do body liberation, but when we think about like the broader term of body positivity, right? That has been co-opted, like the original body positivity movement was really not really, was formed by Black and brown women in larger bodies, and it was really because they did not see themselves represented in mainstream ideas of beauty, and over time it was heavily, heavily, heavily rooted in social justice, right? And the idea that everybody should be able to exist in their bodies regardless of size, shape, gender, sexuality, free of harm. And what we've seen over time is it become really watered down. A lot of white women talking about like cellulite and stretch marks and all of these things, which listen, we all have things about our bodies we don't like. But there's a very, very big difference between having a personal body image issue, as in I don't like the cellulite on my thighs, versus I live in a body that's systemically oppressed. And that's where the messaging has really gotten watered down and yeah, co-opted in so many ways. And then we think about the same thing with Rest is Resistance and Trisha Hershey's work, and it also being co opted and watered down in a lot of ways. And I think, when we talk about white supremacy and we talk about the patriarchy, so many white women love to talk about the patriarchy, right? Like down with the patriarchy, because it's really easy to say men are the problem. And don't get me wrong, I'm going to say the part that that's the problem every time. You're with me. I'm with you on that. However, you also have to talk about your own participation as a white person within the system of white supremacy and even within the system of patriarchy. And this is not like a new concept. We think back to like the early voting rights acts and white women being more concerned about white women getting the right to vote than Black women getting the right to vote, even though Black women were on the front lines fighting with them, right? And so I think it's really easy to point to the patriarchy instead of saying, "Oh, wait a minute, how am I complicit without the system, within the system?" And this is why the whole, topics of white feminism come up, and like white women have to also do the work of understanding how their feminism isn't intersectional and how they are entangled within the system of white supremacy and have not done that difficult work to say, "Wait a minute, how am I being part of the problem?" And it's easier to point to the patriarchy oftentimes than to look in the mirror and do the work within to say, oh, I'm taking up space where I was never meant to be taking up space. I'm co-opting a movement, all of these things that can be really difficult. And I think oftentimes too, like, when we talk about whiteness as a concept within this country, whiteness has always felt like the authority, right? It's not the authority, but it's felt like the authority. And so even when we're thinking about co-opting movements or being whether we're talking about anti-racism or body liberation or rest is resistance, white women's desire to be like, no, I'm the authority on this. I'm going to teach everybody about it versus saying, actually, I'm not the authority on this topic. Everything I learned about this topic is from a Black woman. So I really should not be the mouthpiece for this movement. I should be pointing to other Black and brown women and I'm going to support their work versus trying to be the one who is leader of the movement.
Love all of it. And the piece that I wanted to call out, you said earlier, was about your softness. And I think
Mhm.
for white women to sit with that if they can be really honest with themselves when we talk about rest, that's such a big part of it, where white women have always been allowed to be soft. And in fact, some ways maybe have been forced to be too soft, right? So there's the
Yeah.
reckoning that we have with that. But that is not about then us needing more rest, right? And
Yeah.
that is what you're talking about. And I think that that's so important to be able to be honest with ourselves to say, my work, like you said, is not about the resting part. If anything, it's
Yeah.
rejecting some of that because I have always been treated as soft,
Mhm.
allowed to be soft, and maybe even too soft. Whereas Black women, it's a complete exact opposite experience. And so the resistance is in saying, I am allowed to luxuriate, I am allowed to be soft, I am allowed to rest. So thank you for sharing all of that. As we start to wrap up, I just want to know if for you, if there's anything else as you think about an analogish life, what you are trying, with reconnecting with humanity, there's no judgment here on using devices or anything else. Like, I mean, I do too, but it is wanting to explore how do we just keep remembering that we are humans having a human experience on this in this world, right? So, what comes up for you when you think about that? Anything else that we haven't talked about or that you want to mention?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you brought up the fact there's no shame or judgment because, like, we all use technology, and
We're
I
using
mean,
it to record this.
yes, exactly, and I actually have so much respect for the people who have went back to flip phones. I'm not there yet, maybe one day, but I have so much respect for them. But I think the one thing that I think about is when this part about our humanity is like the important part that remembering that like part of humanity is like struggling through things and like figuring things out. And in the age of the AI, where like it's so much easier just to like ask chat our questions or ask this to do this thing or figure this thing out. And it's like part of our humanity is just like that deep thinking and that work, right? And especially like again, no shame or judgment, but it's like asking ChatGPT how to respond to a friend in conflict. It's like part of the work of our humanity is to just have those difficult conversations, and sometimes we flub them up, and like that's okay. But like our brains are designed and hardwired to think and to work through things. And like that's actually a really important part of our humanity. I think in a world where like so many founders of social media companies don't even allow their kids to use social media, there is something to be for us to stop and think, why is that? You know, they're pushing this to us to use this for everything, and they don't even use it with their own children because they know like the perils that come with doom scrolling for 12 hours a day and constantly being online and like what that does to your brain and your creativity and like all of these things. And so I think we just have to stop and question that sometimes and just be like, it's okay to be stumped. And I think back to when I was a kid before the internet, like I literally just had to figure things out and I figured them out. And it's okay to still work through things and figure it out
And like you said about being bored and just
and be bored. Yes.
I love that. So I like to ask people at the end of this, if there's one thing you want people to do this week, what would it be? And if it's okay, you can say no, but I think it might be interesting to have you say for if you hold a marginalized identity or if you hold more privileged identities, if because I'm curious if there would be a difference in what you would like to see people think about or do this week.
Oh, that's such a good question. I would challenge everybody to spend one with no social media use. Start with an afternoon. If you could do a whole day without social media, that'd be better. So everybody should start with one afternoon of no social media usage. And I would challenge, feel like I have so much power here. I would challenge a white person to read a book, fiction or nonfiction, written by a person of marginalized identity, because I think that so many times people don't read books that like of diverse writers and authors. So I would challenge white listeners to do that. And mar- folks of marginalized identity, I would challenge you this week to just do something that brings you like unapologetic joy.
I love that.
Yeah.
You mentioned you've been reading more. So actually, let's
Yeah.
finish here. And do you have a
Uh-huh.
book recommendation? I'll go first while you think of one.
Okay.
Because
Okay.
you mentioned books written by people with marginalized
Mhm.
identities. I'll specifically say Black women. And I just recently read, it's not a new book, but I just recently read Homegoing by Yagi Yasi. And yeah, I know. And it was unbelievable. I remember Roots and the feelings around that when I was a kid and all of the caveats about problems with that. But this felt like, this feels like what it should have, well, it could have been what it should have
Mm.
been and what it is. Like, just, I can't recommend Homegoing enough. So that's mine. What about
It's Homecoming is so beautiful. Like everybody, yes, follow that
yeah,
recommendation.
should
It's
be
such a
required
beautiful
reading?
read. Oh my gosh, yes. So I read a lot of fiction. So much fiction. So I have two recommendations written by Black women, and it's Kin, and the author is why is it Tiari
Tiare Jones.
Jones?
Yeah.
Tiari Jones, Kin, beautiful book. And then also she also wrote a book called, I mean, she has a few books, but also An American Marriage. I read An American Marriage like in 2019. I was going through a hard time. I had like realized I had been in this like slump of just reading self-help and I needed something just to like clear my palate. And I read An American Marriage and like literally fell in love with fiction. I was like, why have I stopped reading fiction? Why have I forsaken my first love? So both of those books are just so beautifully written. And Ken was just, it's my favorite book of the year so far. So yeah.
It's really good. I read Silver Sparrow. I haven't read American Marriage, so I'll have to read that. And it's
Silver Sparrow, it's on my list. I
I
have
really
it,
liked it.
but I haven't read
I
it
read
yet.
that
So
before I read Ken. I love
okay.
Ken as well. And I'll just also mention then Where the Wildflowers Grow. I don't know if you've heard that one yet. It's a
Yes,
newer
yes,
release this
yes.
year, and it was
Yeah.
gorgeous, gorgeous
I
book.
haven't read it yet though,
Yeah,
but I
that and Ken
do.
are
It's on
probably
my list.
those are probably two of the better newer books that I read this year, and
Yeah.
then Homegoing, which is not a newer book that I love. Okay, thank you. I love that. I think we're telling people get off your screens, so go read a book, and there's some to get started
Yes.
with if you're not
There's
sure what
so
to
many
read.
good ones.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much for doing this, Chrissy. I really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. I had such a great time.
And where do you want people to find you?
Oh, yes, yes, yes. So on Instagram and TikTok, it's I am Chrissy King. And my Substack is the Liberation Collective. And then I have a second Substack, the Child Free Coven.
I didn't even know about that one. I'm not child free, so
Yeah.
it's probably
It's
not for me. Maybe
newish.
that's why, but that's exciting. I didn't know you had two going on.
It's newish, but maybe started a couple months ago. So yeah.
I do meet child free by choice people all the time, though, so now I have nowhere to point them.
Send them to me.
Yeah, I will. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Analogish. This episode is over, but the world is still out there. Go find it.